Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog is quietly one of the most important films of the 2020s. Everyone thinks Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog is terrible because of its incomprehensible writing, amateurish production values, and failure to properly provide its intended public service announcement. They're right. But what they're missing is why that makes Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog an important film, as it unintentionally documents the collapse of fringe, outsider art on the cusp of the AI era. Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog was released on Vimeo in December 2023. It's a sort of conglomeration of various Cool Cat projects like Cool Cat Fights Coronavirus, Cool Cat Kids Superhero, and Cool Cat Flips a House, paired with new material shot for the film. It was written and directed by Derek Savage, who additionally stars in the film as Cool Cat's father, Daddy Derek. Originally, Savage produced the Cool Cat series with the intent of creating children's programming. However, due to his filmmaking incompetence, the Cool Cat brand instead became synonymous with so bad it's good cinema. With that established, I will now expand upon each of the three main criticisms for Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog, and explain why these faults are actually virtues. Firstly, reviewers single out the film's writing as a main criticism. They claim that the dialogue is lazy, inhuman, and even occasionally offensive. Even stranger, they point to there being no semblance of an overarching plot, rendering the story impossible to follow. Reviewers attribute this messiness to the garbled rehash of pre-existing materials, as the movie jumps from public service announcements, house-flipping tutorials, and Harrier jet airstrikes with no apparent rhyme or reason. To respond to that, I totally agree with the reviewers' criticisms here. However, this messiness is exactly what makes the writing interesting. This is because watching Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog feels like having Derek Savage's fever dreams projected directly into your brain. It's a rare peek into a damaged man's rapidly diminishing mental state, a loose conglomeration of his fixations, fetishes, insecurities, and dreams. That's why it's so random, it's an unfiltered mental portrait. Thus, although Savage's intent seems cynical, as exemplified by the desperate fundraising interludes, the final film reads as something else entirely. The combination of its lack of inhibition, singularity of vision, and eccentricity morphs it into a work of outsider art. Put simply, nobody else in the world could have made Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog, and that's what makes it artistically worthwhile. Of course, someone could make that point about any old weird and bad no-budget movie. And of course, there's a valid argument regarding categorization here, as not everything that's obscure should be labeled outsider art. So what is it that distinguishes Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog? Well, in this instance, I'm feeling particularly protective, as it's one of the last of its ilk. This is because of widespread generative AI, which signals the extinction of future Savage-esque cinema. Herein lies what makes Derek Savage such a notable figure. In his latest update video, Savage states that, for the production of all of his future projects, he will be exploiting generative AI.
Making this film, it really has. I've learned so much about AI, and that's going to help for all of my projects coming down in the future.
Retroactively then, this is what makes Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog such an important film. It's almost certainly the last Cool Cat movie to be handwritten by Derek Savage. Of course, this is emblematic of a larger shift in the industry. With AI, from here on out, grifters like Savage are no longer forced to actually write their own material. And why would they? Producing their own material brings them nothing but online ridicule. Due to this shift to AI, outsider cinema will lose the heart of what makes it accidentally special. When writing scripts, AI will follow a safe and clean mathematical formula, filtering out any pesky psychoanalytical eccentricities in the process. These AI-generated scripts will be technically better, but they'll be soulless artistically. That human touch, that unintentional peek into minds at the fringes of society, will be lost. Secondly, reviewers point to the film's production values as a main criticism. They claim that you can find every example of bad filmmaking techniques in this movie. There's poorly mixed sound, Windows Movie Maker level effects, atrocious acting, zero consideration for cinematography, just take your pick. Of course, viewers find this hilarious. They believe that the movie is objectively badly produced, yet they derive ironic humor from its sheer incompetence. To respond to that, I totally agree with the reviewers' criticisms here. However, this amateurishness is exactly what makes the production values interesting. This is because they exemplify a completely unique aesthetic sensibility. Derek Savage's style of filmmaking, although he must be familiar with at least some movies, seems entirely disconnected from the history of cinema. Thus, every decision Savage makes in Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog is equally baffling and intriguing, so much so that it defies comparison and barely resembles a movie. This insular method of a creative process, constricted to a vacuum, is another hallmark of outsider art. To further explain Savage's singular formal sensibility, the home flipping scene is worthy of closer analysis. As Daddy Derek and Cool Cat explore the home, shot in a sort of fly-on-the-wall style, Savage pedantically explains each corner of the house to Cool Cat. Here, Savage is using Cool Cat as a conduit for the intended younger audience, strangely assuming that children would enjoy an in-depth house-flipping tutorial. This juxtaposition of the documentary-style presentation and mascot costume mise-en-scène creates a never-before-seen type of content, a home improvement children's show, somewhere between HGTV and Barney. Now, this is already weird enough, but Savage introduces a third layer, Dirty Dog engaging in biochemical warfare. So for the remainder of this sequence, Savage crosscuts between this children's home improvement show and a cartoonish terrorist plot. I don't know how else to say it, I've never seen anything like it. This is outsider art in its purest form. However, in his shift to generative AI, Savage's status as an outsider artist will be lost. This is because the intrigue will disappear. What makes outsider art engaging is how it provokes questions and further examination. It's all about wondering why a person would make these decisions, and interrogating their reasons for doing so. For example, why does Derek Savage need to include the world's only civilian-owned Harrier jet? Does he think that makes it more marketable to kids? Why does Cool Cat sing over a video of a dog defecating? And most glaringly, why does Derek Savage cast himself as the husband of Mama Cat? Does he have a fetish for cats? Is he a furry? Does he simply not understand what's weird about the whole situation here? Once AI gets involved, however, this train of thought will go nowhere. Granted, AI makes decisions too. For instance, when creating art, AI makes its choices in order to best resemble work created by an actual artist. Thus, since we know why it makes the creative decisions it does, it's simply uninteresting to question it any further. To illustrate this difference, imagine two Cool Cat movies. They're the same, but one is live action and one is AI generated. In these two movies, Cool Cat has 6 fingers on each hand. When the viewer sees that in live action, they interrogate the circumstances which led to that happening. They wonder whether it was an error, a prank, or a purposeful artistic choice. In other words, they wonder what it means. When the viewer sees that in AI, however, they recognize it as a mistake and immediately move on. They understand a deeper explanation doesn't exist, so they don't expend any energy thinking about it any further. Following that thread, in a YouTube comment, Derek Savage said that he'd include an AI gag reel in his first AI-generated Cool Cat movie, Cool Catopia. However, the gag reel at the end of Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog only works because it shows the actual behind-the-scenes process. It feels real, reminding the viewer that Derek Savage and crew actually went out and filmed this material.
Booty time. Okay. And right here, fart time.
That's what makes it charming. So without any kind of peek behind the curtain to offer, what could there possibly be to enjoy about an AI gag reel? Anyways, this is ultimately why the production values are so important to Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog. They feel handmade and leave the movie open to questions, preserving its intrigue and idiosyncrasy as a work of outsider art. Thirdly, reviewers cite the film's failed public service announcements as a main criticism. They claim that Derek Savage, whose stated goal is to educate children on the pandemic, totally fails, as actual pandemic safety tips are relegated to a footnote in the larger movie. Instead, reviewers suspect that Savage harbors more nefarious aims. They feel like Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog is nothing more than a transparent vanity project, a way to slink closer and closer to Hollywood royalty and fund more personal projects down the line. Thus, reviewers think it's gross how, in this movie, Savage masquerades his vanity as altruism. To respond to that, I totally agree with the reviewers' criticisms here. However, the film's failure as a PSA is exactly what makes it interesting. This is because it reveals Derek Savage's true identity as an exploitation filmmaker. Throughout Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog, there is exactly one scene which could be reasonably labeled as a public service announcement. After that, pandemic-era fear-mongering is insensitively and cynically employed as nothing more than mere plot contrivances. Put simply, Derek Savage clearly doesn't care about the pandemic. Rather, he exploits societal issues as a cheap avenue for storytelling and gaining sympathy for funding future films. Keeping this in mind, Savage has more in common with exploitation filmmakers than children's programmers. In practice, Savage pioneers a quasi-film genre, exploitation films for kids. Ultimately, his challenging of traditional norms of taste is yet another notch in Savage's credentials as an outsider artist. To take a step back, I normally wouldn't be nearly this aggressive in asserting claims like these about Derek Savage. However, there's no doubt in my mind that this is the case. To prove this point, Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog's intermission is worthy of closer analysis. In this intermission, Savage interrupts the story with a fundraising plea for his next movie, Cool Cat Stops a School Shooting. He claims that the movie will, quote, help to save kids' lives. Then, with barely a breath in between, Savage immediately shifts to shilling his Cool Cat website and merchandise.
And this film will help to save kids' lives. And hey, that's our mission right here, to make lives better for the children. That's what Cool Cat's all about. And guys, also, I hope you go out and get some Cool Cat merchandise.
What makes this ultimately charming, though, is the transparent sense of pain and desperation behind Savage's eyes. With his gaudy tie and slicked back hair, Savage evokes the aura of a beaten down used car salesman. At this moment, Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog becomes entirely about him, his pain, his struggle, his dreams. And that's beautiful. It's a uniquely human, extremely revealing moment. Bouncing off of that, this style of exploitation PSA could never be replicated by AI. This is simply because of the guardrails put in place by its creators. With AI's strict censorship policies, it's hard to believe that any would successfully generate what, for instance, Dirty Dog does in this movie. He threatens that
the bullets will be flying at your skull,
uses farts to destroy COVID-19 germs, and performs an anti-mask rap. These challenges to good taste, however, are exactly what morph Savage's filmmaking from cynical to provocative. Although admittedly misinformed and performative, these attempts to depict societal issues clearly stems from the mind of a singular artist. And personally, I would take that any day over the regurgitated AI slop echo chamber. All things considered, Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog is an important marker in the history of outsider art. It signifies the last stand of the grifter filmmaker before their inevitable AI self-mutilation. With that said, I hope that Derek Savage renounces his use of generative AI, but that seems like a fantasy at this point. If Cool Cat vs. Dirty Dog sounds interesting to you, then you should definitely check it out. And if there's any other misunderstood or controversial movies that you'd want to see a defense for, then please comment them down below. One last thing, Daddy Derek, if you're seeing this, just know it's all love, baby.